Buenas tardes a todos. Quiero agradecer a Dr. Fernando Contreras por la invitación y ahora hablaré en inglés, que es más fácil para mí. My task today is to discuss the physiopathology of NAFLD. Sorry, these are my disclosures. And starting with the definition, we all know that NAFLD is a large spectrum of disease that encompasses the non-inflammatory NAFL that has only pure steatosis or mild lobular inflammation, and then we have the NASH, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, with an necroinflammation and different degrees of fibrosis. And NASH can then be an early phase NASH with slight fibrosis, or we can have a fibrotic NASH, F2 to F3, or we can have a cirrhotic NASH. And this can progress to hepatocellular carcinoma, either in the cirrhotic phase as well as in the non-cirrhotic phase, what's quite different from other liver diseases. Of course, for the definition of NAFLD, we have that the patient has to have more than 5% of steatosis, and also that we should exclude other causes of liver disease. However, we have been increasingly seeing that we do not need to exclude, because the issue is that very often these diseases are concomitant, and probably the most important is alcohol. Many patients that we see have simultaneously all the metabolic risk factors, but then have an alcohol consumption that puts them outside the criteria for NAFL definition. I think that in the future we probably will have to change this. Then we have other diseases that can be either concomitant or have to be screened for, like for instance celiac disease or hypobeta-lipoproteinemia, or the inborn errors of metabolism such as the LALD, the lysosomal acid lipase deficiency. But I will use now this figure that is from Dr. Marco Arese, our next speaker, that has done a very wonderful paper on the pathogenic mechanisms of NAFLD. And so what we can see here is that usually there's this progression from the normal liver to the liver with isolated steatosis, NASH, or cirrhosis. But as you can see here, it is not necessarily that the patient has to go through all these phases. It is very well possible that it can go from normal liver to NASH, and also again, the hepatocellular carcinoma can appear in any of these phases. In fact, it was never really demonstrated that simple steatosis always precedes NASH. It is possible that both situations follow in parallel, and that inflammation may even precede steatosis. And of course, factors such as insulin resistance can simultaneously induce steatosis and inflammation. We have already discussed a little bit of this. Dr. Naum helped me with this. In fact, the factors that define the progression or the natural history of NASH are first, of course, all the factors of the metabolic syndrome, and then the factors that we cannot change, that are the genes that have already been well discussed. And of course, the diversity with the risk related to gender, where males usually have more NAFLD in younger ages, but then this difference is, almost disappears. Ethnicity was already also very well discussed, and very often we have a family history of the disease. But probably, and we can discuss that in the end, what is it really more important, the genes or the lifestyle? I would tend to say that probably the lifestyle is more important, because we have had all the same genes for many years, and it's only recently that this epidemics of NAFLD-NASH has appeared. So it's because we changed our lifestyles. And we started eating diets that are high in the saturated fatty acids, in the cholesterol, in the fructose, in the carbohydrate, and that are low in the polyunsaturated antioxidants, and also the fiber intake. And mostly we have a very sedentary style of life. Then there are other factors that probably will show to have some importance in the future, such as the programming related with the intrauterine environment and also early infant feedings. So it is depending on all these factors that we can progress through this scale. But the mechanisms that are most related with the natural history of NASH are related with lipotoxicity, hepatocellular damage, inflammation, and then through compensatory proliferation with fibrosis. And I will speak a little bit of each of them, although of course I will not be able to talk about all the mechanisms. So recently there has been a change in the focus on insulin resistance as the main issue in the disease to a focus more on obesity, mostly central obesity. So we passed from an insulinocentric to an adipocentric vision of the disease. And it's very interesting because usually it all starts with a positive caloric balance. And this can result in a healthy expansion of the mature adipocytes. They can expand, increasing their number, and with angiogenesis phenomena to a certain expansion limit. On the other hand, it is possible that the enlargement is a massive enlargement of the existing adipocytes, where each adipocyte gets larger instead of increasing the number, and where there is no angiogenesis associated, so hypoxia phenomena start to appear. And in both situations, at least at a certain point, what happens is that there are significant hypoxia phenomena, and there is an infiltration of the adipose tissue with M2 macrophages, M1 macrophages, and so all the adipose tissue becomes very much inflammatory. And this infiltration of the adipose tissue by macrophages is going to promote further lipolysis that then contribute to increase the hepatic gluconeogenesis, because the lipids that go through lipogenesis from the adipose tissue enter the liver and contribute to increase the gluconeogenesis. So probably it is mostly the lack of healthy tissue expandability that may be responsible for the fact that obesity will induce fatty liver, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. That is, if we would be able to increase in a very healthy way our adipose tissue, it might be possible that nothing bad would happen. But as this does not happen, what happens is that the adipocytes suffer this hypertrophy, and then the phenomena of insulin resistance, hypoxia, oxidative stress, endothelial stress, fibrosis, and cell death happen. And this has an influence in the liver with the development of NAFLD-NASH, but also in the pancreas with the development of diabetes and in the cardiovascular disease. So this all comes together. But coming back to the mechanisms leading to hepatic steatosis, what in fact leads to the excess of fat in the liver? It's quite easy and simple. It's just an imbalance between what comes in and what comes out, between the lipids influx and lipid disposal. And we know that the source of fatty acids that go to the liver are 60% plasma fatty acids that come mostly from adipose tissue. Then we have the 15% that come from diet with the chylomicrons, and we have 25% that come from de novo lipogenesis. And inside the liver, there are phenomena of free fatty acid oxidation that to a certain extent are usually increased, but in certain diseases may be decreased and contribute to more deposition of liver in the fat. And it also depends on the export of fat as VLDL, that when it's decreased also contributes to increased fat in the liver. But this is the fat in the liver. But how does inflammation comes and how patients come from steatosis to steatohepatitis? It is mostly due to inflammation. We have already discussed inflammation in the adipose tissue, but it is also associated with endoplasmic reticulum stress, sterile inflammation, and cell death through these three different mechanisms. In fact, the endoplasmic reticulum, that is an intracellular organelle, is where most of the secreted and membrane proteins are folded, and it's very sensitive to the free fatty acid injury. And what happens is that the misfolded proteins, lipotoxicity and oxidative stress initiate this endoreticulum stress with an unfolded protein response. And with the chronic endoreticulum stress, the response that initially is an adaptive response worsens steatosis, inflammation, and cell death, and thus favors the progression to NASH. The sterile inflammation is the presence of chronic inflammatory infiltrate, is something that happens in the absence of pathogens, is very typical of NAFLD. And the lesion and the cellular death associated with the DAMPs, the damage-associated molecular patterns, and also with the PAMPs. And these DAMPs then trigger inflammation through several receptors, such as TL receptors. And there are these two more recognized forms of cell death, necrosis, that's the one that was known first, but apoptosis has been then recognized as an important form of cell death in non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. However, recently, necroptosis, that's a form of cell death that uses some of the mechanisms similar to apoptosis, but not through the caspases, has been shown to be also important in NAFLD. So, through the apoptosis via, we have usually this low level of inflammation, so low DAMPs and low inflammation, and the necrosis with high DAMPs and high levels of inflammation. And what it has been shown is that using combinations of regulated necrosis and necroptosis inhibitors, this has an additive effect. Because what probably happens is that when we inhibit either necrosis or apoptosis, necroptosis then becomes more important. Another mechanism that also seems to be quite important in NAFLD is the autophagy. Autophagy is a form of the cell to get rid of its debris and also producing energy. But it also behaves as energy sensor. And when there is too much fat, when there is ectopic accumulation of fat, this is sensed as an energy excess, and so this response is inhibited. And the failure of, or the reduction of these autophagy mechanisms may promote, it seems that may promote the development and the progression of NAFLD. So it is possible that the activation of autophagy could prevent at least partially human NAFLD. Coming back to the mechanisms of cell death, what happens is that after the inflammation and cell death develops, it is, there is a development of compensatory proliferation and of fibrosis, and fibrotic phenomena then happen that may lead either to cirrhosis or to HCC. Because the liver responds to the hepatocyte death with a wound healing response that again should be a good thing to a certain extent, but if it's chronically maintained, it's maladaptive. So the energy surplus leads to the inflammation, also to increased LPS and dysbiota, and through the oxidative stress and the endoreticulum stress and the formation of the DAMPs, there is an activation of either the hepatic stellate cells and also the Kupffer cells and the lymphocytes. And also there is an activation of the progenitors, what may lead to potential carcinogenesis. What is the role of the Kupffer cells in this? So the lipids tend to accumulate in Kupffer cells due to the deregulation of the lipid metabolism, and the Kupffer cells are then sensitized to recruit lymphocytes and exhibit a pro-inflammatory phenotype that would be reversible upon lipogenesis inhibition. In patients with NASH, in opposition with those with simple steatosis, they acquire, in fact, a pro-inflammatory phenotype. This is an image, I cannot point, but there is the free cholesterol accumulates in the Kupffer cells and in the hepatic stellate cells, and this contributes both to inflammation and to fibrogenesis. In the two lower panels, you can see the Kupffer cells with multiple cholesterol droplets. So what happens is that all the above mentioned mechanisms result in the activation of the stellate cells, thus leading to fibrogenesis. And this progenitor cell activation can also promote hepatocarcinogenesis, mostly also through the hedgehog activation that has been well demonstrated either in animal and human models of NASH. Then this fibrogenic process tends to perpetuate because the chronic insult is maintaining. And then, depending on the susceptibility, some individuals will have more active profibrogenic mechanisms or have a reduced capacity to shut off the process even when the insult stops. So, in summary, from this figure that I took from this paper from Birne, what you can see, we start with the poor nutrition and all the genetic factors. We have a liver with an excess of fat and with the inflammation. And then we have the stellate cell and Kupffer cell activation resulting from the lipotoxicity. There are also factors related with the intestine, increased permeability and dysbiosis, that for a problem of time I did not have time to mention in more detail. There are also factors related to the primary bile acids, and all this together leads to the fibrogenesis in the liver and eventually to cirrhosis and HCC. So, in summary, excessive fat is toxic to the liver, what in combination with other insults results in the inflammation and hepatocyte deaths. NASH progression will result in the patients where it really happens from this accumulation of the dead hepatocytes and the expansion of a cellular population involved in the response that, although not effective, cannot be stopped due to the persistence of the insult. So it seems that the advanced lesion, hepatic lesion, results more from the individual response than from the lesion itself. Thank you very much.